The saddest people are often the ones who apologize for taking up space. I did not know who said that first, but on the night my life changed, it felt painfully true. My name is Claire Bennett, and if you had met me that evening, the first thing you would have noticed was probably my smile. The second thing would have been my apology. I apologized for almost everything. If someone held a door for me, I apologized for making them wait. If a waiter refilled my water, I apologized for being an inconvenience. If someone accidentally bumped into me, somehow I still found a reason to say sorry. It had become a habit, a reflex, a way of moving through the world without attracting attention. The charity gala was being held in one of Manhattan's most beautiful hotels. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen stars. Soft music floated through the ballroom. People in elegant suits and evening dresses moved between tables covered in white linen and fresh flowers. Everything looked perfect. I did not. I stood near the back of the room holding a tray of donated books for the literacy program I volunteered with. My black dress was simple compared to everyone else's. I preferred it that way. Invisible felt safe. The event coordinator rushed past me carrying a clipboard. "Claire, thank you for staying late." I smiled immediately. "Sorry, I am not moving faster." The woman blinked. "You never need to apologize for helping." I laughed softly, pretending her words did not affect me. But they did, because people had been saying things like that for years. And somehow I never learned how to stop. Across the ballroom, cameras flashed. Important guests arrived. Business leaders, politicians, philanthropists. Then the atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Conversations lowered. Heads turned. A ripple moved through the crowd. I followed everyone's gaze and saw him. Vincent Moretti. Even I knew the name. Most people in New York did. Powerful, wealthy, influential. A man whose presence seemed to change the temperature of every room he entered. He wore a dark tailored suit that somehow made him stand out even among hundreds of guests. Yet it was not the suit people noticed. It was him. The confidence. The composure. The way he walked as though he belonged everywhere. I looked away quickly. Men like Vincent Moretti existed in a completely different universe from women like me. A few minutes later, I headed toward a table near the center of the ballroom. The room suddenly felt warmer than before. My head felt light. I told myself I only needed water. A few deep breaths. Nothing more. But the dizziness continued growing. The music sounded farther away. The lights above seemed too bright. I tightened my grip on the stack of books in my arms. "Keep moving," I told myself. "Keep smiling. Do not cause a scene." Then someone brushed against my shoulder. Several books slipped from my hands and scattered across the floor. Heads turned. Embarrassment rushed through me immediately. "I am sorry," I said. "I am so sorry." I dropped to my knees to gather the books. My sleeve slid slightly upward as I reached for one near the table. For a brief second, the fading marks around my wrist became visible beneath the ballroom lights. I quickly pulled my sleeve back down. Too late. Someone had noticed. I felt it before I saw it. The weight of a stare. Different from curiosity. Sharper. More focused. I looked up. Across the room, Vincent Moretti was watching me. Not the fallen books. Not the awkward scene. Me. His expression had changed. The calm confidence was still there, but something else had appeared beneath it. Concern. Real concern. My heartbeat quickened. I looked away immediately. The room spun. The lights blurred together. My legs felt weak. Somewhere in the distance, I heard someone calling my name. Then the floor disappeared beneath me. The last thing I remember before darkness took over was seeing Vincent move through the crowd faster than anyone else, his eyes fixed on the one thing I had spent years trying to hide. Waking up in an unfamiliar room should have frightened me. Instead, the first thing I felt was confusion. The second was embarrassment. My eyes slowly opened to soft morning light filtering through tall windows. Everything around me looked expensive. The bedding, the furniture, even the silence felt expensive. For several seconds, I stared at the ceiling trying to remember what had happened. Then it came back in pieces. The ballroom, the books falling from my hands, the crowd, Vincent Moretti watching me. After that, nothing. I immediately sat up. A mistake. Dizziness rushed through me so quickly that I had to grab the edge of the mattress. "Easy." The deep voice came from across the room. My heart nearly stopped. I turned and saw Vincent sitting near the window with a tablet resting on his lap. He looked exactly as I remembered. Calm. Controlled. Impossible to ignore. He stood immediately. "You should not move that fast." My face grew warm. "I am sorry." The apology escaped before I could stop it. Vincent's expression changed slightly. Not irritation. Something closer to concern. You do that a lot. I blinked. Do what? Apologize. The observation caught me off guard. I looked away. Sorry. One corner of his mouth moved upward. Not quite a smile. That is exactly what I mean. I wish the floor would open beneath me. Instead, I focused on the room. Where am I? My penthouse. The answer should have alarmed me. Oddly, it did not. Everything felt safe. Too safe. As though someone had carefully removed every reason to be afraid. Vincent walked toward a nearby table and handed me a glass of water. A doctor examined you last night. My attention snapped back to him. A doctor? He nodded. You were exhausted. Dehydrated. You have barely been sleeping. I lowered my eyes immediately. He was right. I had not been sleeping much at all. The doctor also mentioned something else. His voice remained calm. Measured. What? For a moment, silence filled the room. Then his gaze shifted briefly toward my wrist. My stomach tightened. Instantly, I pulled my sleeve lower. Vincent noticed. Of course he did. He seemed like the type of man who noticed everything. You do not have to explain anything you are not ready to explain, he said quietly. Relief washed through me so suddenly it almost hurt. He was not demanding answers. He was giving me a choice. I was not used to that. Most people either ignored obvious problems or pushed until they got what they wanted. Vincent didn't either. The room remained quiet. Outside, Manhattan stretched beyond the windows beneath clear blue skies. Life continued as though nothing had changed. Yet something had changed. I could feel it. Why did you help me? I finally asked. Vincent seemed surprised by the question. Because you needed help. Most people would have called someone else. Most people were not standing where I was standing. I frowned slightly. What does that mean? His gaze held mine. Steady. Unwavering. It means I saw you. The words settled somewhere deep inside me. More deeply than they should have. Because for years I had become very good at being invisible. Helpful. Quiet. Easy to overlook. Yet somehow Vincent Moretti had noticed the one thing I spent every day trying to hide. Not the smile. Not the politeness. Not the apologies. The pain underneath them. And for reasons I still could not understand, he seemed unwilling to look away. People think fear looks dramatic. They imagine shaking hands, panicked voices, desperate cries for help. The truth is much quieter. Fear often looks like a smile. It looks like politeness. It looks like a woman saying sorry when somebody steps on her foot. The days after I woke up in Vincent's penthouse passed in a strange sort of calm. Every morning, sunlight poured through the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. Every evening, the city lights transformed the skyline into something beautiful enough to forget your troubles for a few minutes. Yet no matter how peaceful everything seemed, Vincent continued watching me with the same careful attention. Not in a way that felt controlling. In a way that felt concerned. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the penthouse library. The room was larger than my entire apartment. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. The scent of old books filled the air. For someone who worked in a library, it felt almost magical. I had spent nearly an hour organizing a small stack of novels when Vincent entered carrying a cup of coffee. You reorganized my shelves. I immediately stood. I am sorry. I should have asked first. The words escaped automatically. Vincent stopped walking. Slowly, he set the coffee down on a nearby table. Claire. My stomach tightened. Yes. Why are you apologizing? I looked away. I touched your books. You improved my books. I opened my mouth to respond and then closed it again. Because I honestly did not know how to answer. Vincent studied me for several seconds. Has anyone ever told you that you apologize even when you have done nothing wrong? A nervous laugh escaped me. A few people. More than a few, I imagine. I folded my arms and stared at the shelves. Silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. Eventually Vincent spoke again. You apologized when you woke up. You apologized when I handed you water. You apologized when the doctor checked on you. You apologized for dropping books after you nearly collapsed. Heat rushed to my face. Hearing it listed out loud sounded ridiculous. I do not know. His expression softened. I think you do. The problem was that I did know. Deep down, I always knew. Apologizing made people less angry, less disappointed, less likely to leave. At least that was what I had taught myself years ago. The realization sat heavily in my chest. Vincent walked toward one of the windows overlooking the city. Fear teaches people strange lessons. The words caught my attention immediately. He continued staring at the skyline. Sometimes it teaches them to stay quiet. Sometimes it teaches them to expect the worst. Sometimes it teaches them to believe they are responsible for everything. My throat tightened, because every word felt directed at me. Not cruelly, accurately. I moved closer to the window. Traffic flowed through the streets below. Tiny cars, tiny people, tiny lives. From this height, everything seemed simpler. And what if those lessons become habits? I asked quietly. Vincent finally looked at me. His eyes remained steady, certain. Then someone has to remind you that they were never true in the first place. The room grew silent again. But something felt different this time. For the first time, Vincent was not seeing the version of me I showed the world. He was seeing the frightened woman underneath it. And somehow, that terrified me less than I expected. The people who care about you rarely reveal themselves through grand gestures. They reveal themselves through the small things they notice that everyone else ignores. Over the next several days, I began noticing something about Vincent. He paid attention, not to the obvious things, to the quiet things, the things most people overlooked. One morning, I entered the kitchen and found a cup of tea waiting beside the chair I usually chose near the window. Not coffee, tea, the exact kind I preferred. I stared at it for a moment before looking toward Vincent. He was reading reports at the opposite end of the table. "How did you know?" I asked. He glanced up. "Know what?" "That I like this tea." Vincent looked genuinely confused. "You ordered it 3 times at the charity event." I blinked. "You remembered that?" "You seem surprised." The truth was that I was. Most people barely remembered my name after meeting me once. Vincent remembered what I drank. The realization lingered with me long after breakfast ended. Later that afternoon, I accompanied him to a meeting at one of the educational foundations he supported. The conference room overlooked the Hudson River. Executives discussed budgets. Community leaders presented plans. Throughout the entire meeting, I remained silent, listening, observing, staying out of the way. At least that was my intention. Near the end of the discussion, one of the directors mentioned a literacy program struggling to attract volunteers. Before I could stop myself, I quietly suggested an idea. The room fell silent. Immediately, I regretted speaking. Heat rushed to my face. "Sorry," I said. I did not mean to interrupt. Several people returned to their notes. The conversation moved on, but Vincent did not. "Actually," he said calmly, "I think Claire's idea deserves more attention." Every head turned back toward me. My stomach tightened. Vincent leaned back in his chair. "Would you explain it again?" For a second, I forgot how to breathe. Nobody had ever done that before. Nobody had ever stopped a room and handed the spotlight back to me. Yet Vincent waited patiently, not forcing me, simply believing I had something worth saying. Slowly, I explained my idea. By the time I finished, several people were nodding. Notes were being taken. The program director was smiling. The meeting continued. But my thoughts remained fixed on one thing. Vincent had noticed the moment I dismissed myself, and he had refused to let me disappear. That evening, Manhattan glowed beneath a sky filled with early winter clouds. I stood near the penthouse windows watching headlights move through the streets below. The city looked endless. Vincent joined me carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You handled yourself well today." I laughed softly. I nearly apologized for speaking. "Exactly." I looked down at my hands. "Old habits." His reflection appeared beside mine in the glass. "Habits can change." The words sounded simple, yet they stayed with me. Because Vincent never spoke as though I was broken. He spoke as though I was capable of becoming someone stronger than I believed possible. For years, I had measured my worth by how little trouble I caused other people. But standing beside those windows, watching the city lights shimmer in the darkness, I began wondering if there was another way to see myself. And for the first time, I found myself wanting to discover what Vincent seemed to see every time he looked at me. Some truths sit inside you for so long that they begin to feel like part of your identity. You stop questioning them. You stop fighting them. You simply carry them everywhere you go. A week after the foundation meeting, winter settled fully over Manhattan. Snow dusted the rooftops each morning. The city seemed quieter beneath the cold sky. Yet inside Vincent's penthouse, something was changing. Not around me. Inside me. The fear was still there. The habit of apologizing was still there. But now there was something else beside them. Trust. Small at first. Fragile. Growing. One evening, I found myself sitting alone on the terrace wrapped in a blanket. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the glass railing. Tiny stars scattered across the earth. I listened to the distant hum of traffic below and allowed myself to enjoy the silence. The door opened behind me. Vincent stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He handed one to me before taking the chair beside mine. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The warmth of the drink seeped into my hands. The cold air stung my cheeks. It felt peaceful. Eventually, Vincent looked toward me. "You have been thinking a lot lately." I smiled faintly. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone paying attention." The answer made me laugh softly. Then the laughter faded. Because suddenly I was tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Tired of carrying stories I never told. Tired of pretending everything was fine. Vincent seemed to sense the shift immediately. He did not ask questions. He simply waited. The same way he always did. Patient. Present. Safe. I stared at the skyline for a long moment before speaking. "My father left when I was 11. The words surprised even me. I had not planned to say them. Yet once they appeared, more followed. After that, it was just my mother and me. The city blurred slightly as old memories returned. Small apartments. Late bills. Long workdays. Endless worries. She worked constantly. 2 jobs sometimes. She did everything she could. My voice grew quieter, and I spent years trying not to be a burden. Vincent remained silent, listening, giving me space. I learned very young that people were already carrying enough problems. I stared down into my cup, so I stopped asking for help. The confession lingered in the cold air between us. I stopped complaining, stopped needing things, stopped expecting anyone to stay. My throat tightened. The realization hurt because it was true. Not partially true. Completely true. Vincent finally spoke. "And when people treated you poorly?" I laughed softly. There was no humor in the sound. I blamed myself. The answer came too quickly, too honestly. His jaw tightened slightly. Not anger toward me. Something else. Something deeper. "Claire." I looked toward him. The city lights reflected in his eyes. "None of that was your fault." Simple words. Yet hearing them felt almost impossible. Because I had spent years believing the opposite. Years convincing myself that if I were better, quieter, easier, stronger, then life would have hurt less. Tears gathered unexpectedly. I looked away before they could fall. Vincent did not rush to comfort me. He did not offer empty reassurances. He simply remained beside me. Steady, unmoving, present. And for the first time, I told someone the truth. Not the polished version. Not the brave version. The real version. The lonely version. The frightened version. The version I had hidden from everyone, including myself. And somehow, when the words were finally spoken aloud, they felt a little less heavy than before. There comes a moment when carrying pain becomes harder than telling the truth. I think that was the moment I reached. The conversation on the terrace stayed with me long after Vincent and I went back inside. For the first time in years, someone knew more than the carefully edited version of my life. He knew about the loneliness, the fear, the belief that I had to earn my place in the world by asking for nothing. I expected to feel exposed afterward. Instead, I felt exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes after holding a heavy weight for too long. The next morning, snow drifted past the penthouse windows in slow white spirals. The city looked softer beneath the winter sky. I stood alone in the kitchen staring at a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. My thoughts would not settle. Memories kept resurfacing. Every time I had stayed silent. Every time I had convinced myself that my feelings mattered less than everyone else's. Every time I had apologized simply for existing. The realization hurt more than I wanted to admit. Vincent found me there nearly an hour later. One glance was all it took. "You did not sleep." It was not a question. I tried to smile. I slept a little. His expression told me he did not believe me. He pulled out the chair across from mine and sat down. Neither of us spoke immediately. Outside, traffic moved through the snowy streets below. Inside, the silence felt heavier than usual. Finally, Vincent leaned forward slightly. "What are you fighting?" The question broke something inside me. Not because it was harsh, because it was kind. My eyes immediately filled with tears. I looked away, embarrassed, ashamed, frustrated. "Claire." His voice softened. "Look at me." Slowly I did. The concern in his expression was genuine, unwavering. For weeks he had been patient. For weeks he had waited. For weeks he had offered safety without asking for anything in return. Suddenly I was tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of being strong all the time. The first tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. Then another. My shoulders trembled. I lowered my head. I am tired, I whispered. The words barely escaped. I am so tired. Years of loneliness poured into those 4 words. Vincent remained silent, letting me continue. I am tired of feeling responsible for everything. Tired of believing I have to make myself smaller so other people can be comfortable. Tired of apologizing. Tired of being afraid that if I make one mistake, everyone will leave. My voice broke completely. Tears blurred my vision. I could not remember the last time I had cried in front of another person. Maybe because I never felt safe enough to. Vincent moved to the chair beside me. Not rushing. Not overwhelming me. Simply sitting close enough that I knew I was not alone. Claire, he said quietly, you do not have to earn the right to be cared for. I closed my eyes. More tears came. Because deep down, that was exactly what I had spent my entire life trying to do. Earn love. Earn patience. Earn acceptance. Vincent's hand gently covered mine. Steady. Warm. Certain. You never did. The room fell silent again. But it was a different silence now. Not the silence of isolation. The silence of finally being understood. And for the first time in years, I stopped fighting my emotions. I stopped pretending I was fine. I stopped carrying everything alone. Sitting beside Vincent as snow fell beyond the windows, I allowed myself to break. And somehow, instead of falling apart, I began to heal. Healing does not arrive all at once. It arrives in small moments that seem insignificant until you look back and realize they changed everything. The days after my breakdown in the kitchen felt different. Not because my problems disappeared. They did not. Not because my fears vanished overnight. They remained. The difference was that I was no longer carrying them alone. For years, every difficult thought had lived only inside my head. Now someone else knew. Someone else understood. And somehow that made the weight easier to bear. One snowy afternoon, Vincent asked if I wanted to accompany him to another foundation event. The old version of me would have immediately looked for an excuse. Crowds made me nervous. Attention made me uncomfortable. The possibility of saying the wrong thing terrified me. Yet something inside me hesitated before refusing. I will think about it, I said. Vincent nodded once. No pressure. No persuasion. Just acceptance. Later that evening, I surprised myself by agreeing. The event was held inside a renovated community center on the west side of Manhattan. Families filled the building. Children ran through hallways decorated with colorful artwork. Volunteers greeted guests with warm smiles. The atmosphere felt welcoming rather than intimidating. Still, as Vincent and I entered together, I felt familiar anxiety creeping into my chest. What if I embarrassed myself? What if I said something wrong? What if I did not belong there? Vincent seemed to notice immediately. You are doing it again. I glanced toward him. Doing what? Assuming everyone is waiting for you to fail. The accuracy of the observation made me laugh despite myself. Is it that obvious? Only because I know you. The words settled warmly inside me. Only because I know you. Nobody had ever said something like that before. As the afternoon continued, I found myself speaking with volunteers, educators, and families. Slowly at first, then more naturally. The conversations felt easier than I expected. At one point, a young girl approached our table carrying a stack of books nearly half her height. She could not have been older than 10. Excuse me, she said shyly. Are you the library lady? I laughed softly. I suppose I am. Her face brightened. The reading program was your idea, right? For a second, I froze. Then I nodded. The girl smiled. I really like it. Such a simple sentence. Yet it hit me harder than I expected. Because for so long I had convinced myself that my voice did not matter, that my ideas were not important. Yet here stood a child benefiting from something I almost never suggested because I was too afraid to speak. When the event ended, Vincent and I stepped outside beneath a sky filled with falling snow. Streetlights illuminated thousands of white flakes drifting through the darkness. The city felt peaceful, quiet, hopeful. We walked slowly toward the waiting car. You look different today, Vincent said. I pulled my coat tighter against the cold. Different how? Like someone who was starting to believe she belonged in the room. My heart tightened unexpectedly. Because he was right. For a few brief hours, I had forgotten to doubt myself. Forgotten to apologize. Forgotten to shrink. I looked toward the glowing skyline ahead of us. Then back at Vincent. Thank you. The words felt different this time. Not an apology. Not an obligation. A genuine expression of gratitude. Vincent smiled faintly. You are welcome, Claire. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt larger than my fear. Sometimes the most important victories are invisible. Nobody applauds them. Nobody celebrates them. Yet they change the direction of an entire life. By the time February arrived, Manhattan had settled into the quiet rhythm of winter. Snow still covered parts of the city. Cold winds swept through the streets. But for the first time in years, I no longer felt trapped inside my own thoughts. The changes were small at first. I stopped apologizing every time I spoke. Not completely. Old habits do not disappear overnight. But I noticed them now. And when they appeared, I challenged them. One afternoon, I caught myself saying sorry after asking a simple question. Vincent looked at me from across the dining table and raised an eyebrow. I immediately laughed. There it was again, was it not? He nodded. But this time you noticed. That felt important somehow. Progress was not perfection. Progress was awareness. The more time passed, the more I began rebuilding pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. I returned to the library several days each week. The familiar scent of books welcomed me back like an old friend. Colleagues commented that I seemed different. Happier. More confident. I usually smiled and changed the subject. Explaining the transformation felt impossible. How could I describe what happens when someone spends months teaching you that your voice matters? One Saturday morning, Vincent invited me to tour a new educational project his foundation planned to support. The building was still under construction. Dust covered the floors. Blueprints lined the walls. Most people would have seen an unfinished structure. Vincent saw possibilities. As we walked through the future classrooms, he asked for my opinion about everything. Reading spaces, community programs, volunteer outreach. At first I answered cautiously, then more openly. Eventually I forgot to be afraid. Standing in the center of what would become a children's reading room, I found myself passionately describing ideas for literacy workshops. Vincent listened without interrupting. When I finally stopped speaking, slightly embarrassed by my enthusiasm, he smiled. That was the longest speech you have given since I met you. I laughed. Was it terrible? Not even close. The warmth in his voice made something inside me settle. Because months earlier I would have apologized for speaking too much. Now I was asking whether my ideas were useful. The difference seemed small. It was not. Later that evening, we stood on the penthouse terrace watching snowflakes drift across the city lights. The skyline stretched endlessly before us. Beautiful. Familiar. Home. You know something? Vincent said quietly. I looked toward him. What? His gaze remained fixed on the horizon. The woman who arrived here after the gala is not the same woman standing here now. The words lingered in the cold air. I followed his gaze toward the city below. He was right. The frightened woman who believed she had to earn kindness was fading, not disappearing completely. Healing was not that simple. But she no longer controlled every decision, every thought, every fear. I think she is still part of me, I said softly. Vincent nodded. She always will be. I looked at him. Then what changed? For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he answered. She stopped facing everything alone. As the city lights shimmered beneath the winter sky, I realized he was right. Strength had never been about carrying every burden by myself. Real strength was allowing someone to stay long enough to help carry them with me. Spring arrived quietly. One morning the snow was gone. A week later flowers appeared along the sidewalks. Then suddenly Manhattan felt alive again. Sunlight reflected from glass towers. Cafes opened their outdoor tables. People filled the parks. The city seemed to breathe easier. Standing near the penthouse windows one bright April morning, I realized something surprising. For the first time in years, I was excited about the future. Not worried about it. Not afraid of it. Excited. The feeling was unfamiliar. Wonderful. Months had passed since the night I collapsed at the charity gala. Looking back, it felt like remembering another person's life. The frightened woman who apologized for everything. The woman who believed she had to stay invisible to be accepted. The woman who thought asking for help was weakness. She still existed somewhere inside me. But she was no longer in control. That afternoon, Vincent and I attended the grand opening of the community learning center we had spent months helping develop. Families filled the building. Children explored classrooms. Volunteers greeted guests. Laughter echoed through hallways that had once been empty construction spaces. Everywhere I looked, I saw possibility. Hope. New beginnings. Near the entrance stood a large sign thanking everyone who contributed to the project. My name appeared alongside dozens of others. Months earlier, seeing that would have made me uncomfortable. I would have insisted I did not deserve recognition. Today I simply smiled. Not because I suddenly needed attention, because I finally understood that contributing something meaningful was nothing to apologize for. Throughout the afternoon, people approached to discuss literacy programs and future events. I answered questions, shared ideas, even spoke briefly in front of a small group of volunteers. When I finished, applause filled the room. My first instinct was still to say sorry. The old habit flickered for half a second, then disappeared. Instead, I said thank you. The difference felt enormous. As the celebration ended, Vincent found me standing outside near the Hudson River. The water shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Boats drifted slowly across the surface. Behind us, the city skyline stretched toward the clouds. You never apologized during your speech, Vincent said. I laughed. You noticed? I notice everything. The answer made me smile. We stood together watching the river. Comfortable silence settled between us. The kind that exists only when two people truly understand each other. Eventually, I turned toward him. Do you remember the first thing I said after waking up here? Vincent thought for a moment. Then his expression softened. You apologized. I nodded. I think I apologized 10 times that day. At least. We both laughed. Then the laughter faded into something quieter, more meaningful. I looked out across the water before speaking again. Thank you for seeing me. Vincent remained silent, listening. Not the version I pretended to be, the real version. My voice grew softer. The scared version. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Vincent reached for my hand. Warm, steady, familiar. Claire, he said quietly, you were always worth seeing. The words settled deep inside me. Not because they fixed everything. Not because they erased the past. Because I finally believed them. The evening sun painted the river gold as we stood together beside the water. The city moved around us. Endless. Beautiful. Alive. And for the first time in my life, I was not shrinking to fit inside someone else's expectations. I was standing tall. Not because someone rescued me. Because someone reminded me that I was never as broken as I believed. And as I looked toward the future waiting beyond the horizon, I realized something simple and beautiful. The girl who once apologized for existing was gone. In her place stood a woman who finally understood her own worth.